Not every XKCD strip is suitable for work. Occasionally the guy gets a little wacky in his personal life, and it sometimes spills over into the strip, but they're always brilliant. They're just not shareable.
You always have to do the old thing too. Wait until the message shows up.
Oh, absolutely. So he's a fan of Python. I'm a fan of Python. If any of you aren't programmers and you're looking for a first language, please take a look at Python. They'll make you happy again. I wrote 20 short programs in Python yesterday. It was wonderful. Perl, I'm leaving you. And for any of you who are going, oh, Jesus, I'm feeling excluded already, I promise it won't be that kind of talk. I put up the obnoxious Dilbert Unix comic a little bit earlier, so anyone who's familiar with that one. Here's a nickel kid, go get yourself a better computer, Unix guy.
I like the one, the boss asked for a database, and they said, what color database would you want? Oh, I think pink is the fastest one.
That's right. Yeah, pink database. Now, stacked. Windows 7. Okay. All right, so it's a little bit after 10:30. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's Ben Chapman. I'm the IT director at Emory Law School. Like every IT director, I am fortunate to have a fantastic staff, and am lucky enough that they leave me alone and do their jobs quietly and uncomplainingly. And so then I get to be like this mad scientist in the corner, which is great and a lot of fun. And about 1 out of every 10 projects I start on, they go, yeah, that one makes sense. and so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about a few of those projects that have made a little bit of sense for us. And I want to give you some background. By the way, in case you're all of a sudden feeling like you'd rather be outside in the sunshine, everything I'm going to talk about today is on blogs.law.emory.edu/ITwiki/blah, blah, blah. CALI 2010 BJC. But if you go to blogs.law.emory.edu, you can find it. There's some wiki pages. But what I wanted to talk about is the environment that we're in at Emory Law. We're extraordinarily fortunate that we are not a one-person IT shop, supporting 700 users. We're not in that situation. But we do face resource constraints like everyone else, everywhere. And it's always nice to be able to come up with tools or tricks or shortcuts that either save money or, increasingly, the longer I do this, that delight you. There are things that make my day more fun, and they're geeky things, some of them, a lot of them. But that's a little bit about what I want to share today. Some of these tools I just like. I mean, on a sort of weird, gut level, the way I never felt about Ghost. But our shop, we have 715 law students. We've got 6 IT people, including classroom support. We have about 130 faculty and staff when you add it all together. 220-something desktops out there now, something like that. 220 desktops, a smaller lab, but we still do have a lab, at least for a little bit longer. And that's our environment. Everybody currently runs Windows XP except for the 3 renegade faculty members who have their own stuff. And they run Macs mainly. Half my IT department now runs Macs. Half our students now bring Macs to the law school. So I think we're a fairly typical IT shop, actually, right now in the current environment. What might make us a little bit different is that on the back end, I have a very strong preference for Linux, and I'm just trying to get more honest about that. I used to always say, we use a little Linux here and there. Basically, I would rather do everything in the back end on Linux. So again, my staff put up with me, and we go back and forth and negotiate that. Emory Law School, www.law.emory.edu, founded in 1916. We live in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta is home to several law schools, representatives of which are here. There's a lot going on. I've been really impressed with Georgia State, with John Marshall. UGA is doing some great stuff. There's some really neat things happening in the state of Georgia right now. Mentioned the IT Wiki. I've got a blog over here if you ever want to look at that. By the way, if you do come up with tips, techniques, when you share them, and someone writes you back saying thanks, just 2 words, thank you, it's just wonderful. I did something the other day that was fairly geeky, had to do with pass-through authentication and Kerberos and something. Got off the plane, opened up the phone, had a thank you from the University of Wisconsin Medical School. And there was a guy that said, thank you, works great. If you're ever in a situation where you're on someone's webpage and you get some benefit from something that they've taken the time to write up, just thank them. Or even better, write up your own stuff and wait for the thanks to come rolling in. It's nice. So I'm going to talk about 4 things. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit about MythTV. But let's get started with ping. Part image is not ghost. Unix people are famous for crappy acronyms. Really, and you look at that and you're like, Jesus, that's dopey. It means very little to anyone. Anyway, so that's ping. Ping is an awesome project by a French guy for you Perl hackers. It's 9,400 lines of Perl just spewing forth. It's monolithic, it's not object-oriented, it's not nothing. It starts at line 1 and moves down through 9,400 lines. Now, for the Windows users in the room, the great thing about ping is you don't have to be a geek to use it, to take advantage of it. We have used it as a replacement for Ghost for 4 years now. And we don't have to worry about, I always suspected I was not in compliance with my Ghost licensing terms back in the days when we did use Ghost. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Ping works well enough for us. So here's how ping works. And I'm going to run through some of this because there's some other tools that are kind of cooler, but I've got some videos on here and a lot of images, so if you are really bored, you can come back to that. Basically for ping, you download this part of it. Now, again, classic open source. This fellow's first language is not English. When you read the docs, and if I were a better person, or if I had more time, I would pitch in and write some documentation. This is I didn't get to it, so here you go. All right. So what you need is you need to download this part image thing, save that, and then you need a shared folder on a network. You need a username, you need a password, and you install the part image folder that you downloaded or unzipped onto your network. And then over time, as you begin to use this, your server shares start to look like this. Some of you with Ghost images may have similar setups, where all of a sudden you've got 47 images because you're in the habit of backing up individual faculty members' machines regularly because it's better that way. And so ping is what we're using to do that. That's about all the configuration required on the server side. I've got links. You can get the CDs. Okay, and you need to know the IP address of your server, and it can be Windows Server. This is the kind of thing I want to drive home today. This stuff is primarily for people who are not Linux geeks. This is kind of to help you bridge the gap a little bit. That's sort of the focus here. You need to know some basic information about the server. You need a folder on the server, and if I'd been thinking when I was doing things, I would have set it up slightly differently. No need to dwell on that, but there's a note there. And then I've got a video, which I'm not going to bore you with. Okay, it's about 3 minutes long. It shows you what the process looks like. It's basically click, type, click, that kind of thing. It's a text, basically. And then that enables you to make a complete copy of a file system partition or partitions and send it up to the network. So then the image is sitting on the network. It's available for restoration. The restoration process is the reverse of that. One of the things, though, that we did is we were trying to make it easier for our technicians so that they wouldn't have to remember the share names, wouldn't have to remember the IP address of our server, where the images were stored, all of that. And it's easy enough. This is where Linux people go off the rails. Somebody out there in the audience is looking, just going, what? It is easy enough. This is a set of parameters that are being passed to a Linux kernel when it boots off the CD that define a lot of settings so that you don't have to type them. And once you do that, that's this stuff here. Server equals the share, the username, our password, the directory. We don't ever want to see a shell. We want the machine to reboot after it's been imaged. We don't. Part image offers a kind of cool feature, but it always worried me. We do not want to replace the BIOS with a copy of a file that was there. And I think we've actually managed to, we had an issue there. But anyway. All right, so minimize before storing it. We'll do some fancy stuff to shrink the size of your partitions. Too fancy for us. Our network's a little slow to respond to DHCP requests, so we extended the timeout so that the client would get an IP address. We bundle all of that into this set of parameters that we're giving back to the ping that are used during the ping boot sequence, and it boots up and it asks people a very minimal number of questions, which makes it a little bit easier for our technicians to be comfortable using this. Again, I've got a lot of notes. I'm not going to dwell on that. One of the things that I try to do, one of the areas where I think I can add a little bit of value to our operation is to script things that happen a lot. And so this is an example of how to configure multiple ping configurations. This is the kind of thing I do. This happens before we burn the CD. But more and more, if I find myself having to write notes about something, I just go ahead and write a script that will do the thing for me. Especially as I get older, it makes things work more likely that they'll work. All right, so when this is done, you have this bootable CD, you stick it in the box, you can copy images back and forth to the server. That's the bottom line. It's a ghost replacement. It does not do multicast. So if you're trying to blow out images to 100 machines in a lab and you're conscious of your network bandwidth, this is not the tool for you. It's a great tool for deploying 3, 4, 5, 6 machines at a time, which is the kind of stuff we find ourselves doing a lot. It's also good for making backups and doing restores. Let's see what else we've got here. It attempts to make, we have a mixture of old PCs and new PCs, ATA drives and SATA drives. It does try to intelligently deal with that. We've had sort of mixed success with that. And the other thing, of course, if you all are, I assume everyone in this room images machines, but if you're new to that, you would either need to use sysprep or USID to configure the proper GUIDs for your GUIDs for your machine. All right. So questions about ping?
And so how easy is it to add network drivers for new hardware?
The classic gotcha. Dan's putting up. This is the classic gotcha in the window in the Linux world. This will have bitten those of you particularly who are Novell users. The Novell product is called
ZenWorks.
ZenWorks, okay. The Novell product is called ZenWorks, and back in the day, we used Novell a lot, and I loved ZenWorks, I loved the concept of it. Novell was a little bit slow to add new network drivers, and so the classic example of that would be the Intel Gigabit Ethernet driver, which inexplicably wasn't in the ZenWorks stuff. This guy seems to be very good about keeping drivers up to date. We have not run into that issue, and we've got a mixture of Broadcom, Intel, a couple of other nice ones lately.
Marvell is pretty common for on-board chips.
Well, and especially since this guy is French, I think we got Marvell support. I always think of them as a French company, maybe I'm wrong. But,
I think they're based out of San Jose, actually.
well, okay. France, California. Okay, now some of you Windows users out there surely will be saying, why don't you use, what's the current Windows kind of command line tool?
ImageX.
ImageX, okay? I'm not advocating this over ImageX, right? If ImageX fits your workflow and your process, you should definitely look at ImageX. I wanted to hear someone say ImageX just because there are, I think a lot of people are not aware that that exists. It's a good tool.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool, but it does something different. It builds a computer in a scripted fashion. It doesn't rewrite the partition with a set image. So we use kind of both in different roles.
Use Ghost and ImageX?
We just migrated off Ghost about a year or two ago. We're using ZenWorks for partition management and imaging. But ImageX is a good tool for building images in a building a computer in a scripted fashion, because it does the install, applies things in a scripted fashion. So it basically just does a scripted install, which is not the same as restoring a partition that is set and frozen in time.
The other thing about ImageX, of course, is a Windows tool. It's designed for Windows PCs. You do have a little more flexibility. I mean, always the trade-off, I mean, it's always our trade-off is between flexibility and sweat equity, in this world. And so you do have, you can spend a fair amount of time futzing with tools like this, with things like Ping, but now we've got it in place and working. I think we've used it for quite a while. Like I said, 4 years, it's worked well. Anyway, now let's move on to something. This is really on a different level of scale than Ping. Openfiler is a custom distribution of Linux designed to turn commodity hardware into a NAS or sandbox. So network attached storage, or a storage area network. I noticed that I've spelled terrific. That's the Arkansas in me coming out. It's a terrific thing. Anyway, Openfiler is actually really, really good. There are a few use cases for it, and I want to talk about that. Because I wasn't sure about about whether I could actually get through our firewall and get back to it, you're going to have to suffer through some screenshots of it. So we'll wander around in that, and then I may actually look at the box a little bit. And I should say that the way that we use Openfiler is we already have various storage options. So various storage tiers, ranging from the university EMC stuff to our Apple RAID box, which is unfortunately no longer supported and is now out of warranty, to direct attached storage, to things like this, which sort of are somewhere, we'd call it tier 2 or tier 3 storage, where you're you're rating your disks, so you've got some protection against drive failure, but you're not, this would never be my sole storage for my faculty members' home directories. I'm just saying within our context, within our structure. That's not the way we use Openfiler. So So I want to be clear about that. We're not saying this is an alternative to the very expensive EMC boxes we rent from the university. So Openfiler, again, you've got a CD, you stick it in the box, you install it. From that point forward, you administer Openfiler completely through a GUI interface. Sort of Kilroy was here, Penguin greets you. The username is Openfiler, the password is something else. The nice thing about Openfiler is the number of different services that it provides you. Let me walk through the screens first, and then I'll come back to that. The main status screen, you can see. By the way, Harold Beaver built this machine for us a long time ago. We're big on keeping things running if they run. Anyway, it's you don't need much in terms of CPU horsepower if you're just moving bits around, right? It's mostly network and drive bound, I/O bound. So it's the Celeron, 2.8 gigahertz Celeron with a whopping 6,000 BOGO bits. Glad to see that. Now, we've got a gig of RAM in it. You can see that it's actually using most of the RAM, not a bad thing on a Linux server. That's perfectly fine. And then you can see our storage. We have 1.4 terabytes of storage in this box. It's 4 750 gig SATA somethings. People tell me Western Digitals. In a nice aluminum case, but it was a white box case with a nice drive cage, and we'll talk a little bit about the three-ware controller in a second, which is really the core piece of this, is the RAID controller that you put in the box. So this is an example of a service that if you're going to put it into production, and again, we don't look at this as first-tier storage, but as second or third-tier storage, even then, it's production storage, and people are relying on it. And so even if the software is free, we spent some money on a computer. We didn't buy a new Dell server, but we also didn't buy the cheapest thing we could find Newegg either. And one of the core things you have to do is you have to buy a decent RAID controller, and freeware makes great RAID controllers. And I know there are other alternatives. Anyway, so that's the main status screen that you see when you start out. And now, there's another classic thing with the way that open source software works. Generally speaking, GUIs are written from the perspective of the programmer, not from the perspective of a designer or a user interface person. So he starts out with status, system, volumes, quota, shares, services, accounts. Read it from right to left. I always start with accounts, right? The users are the most important thing, not the storage. And so you start out with accounts and you configure the accounts. One of the great things about Openfiler is you can either use a local LDAP directory or you can join it to your Windows domain. They make the process of joining it to the Windows domain, assuming you otherwise have domain subadmin rights or admin rights, relatively painless. In our case, because of the way we use it, we keep a local LDAP server and we use local users and groups. Everything about Openfiler is based on groups, and they give you just a very easy, straightforward way to define groups. You define the groups first, then you define the users. Once you've got the users, again, it does not hide its Linux origins. The primary group, 500, local users. Anyway, but it all works. It all works just the way you want. Now, finally, you're getting to the interesting stuff. You've set up a few users. You've created a few groups. Again, all permissions are going to be group-based, not user-based. This is what we're all striving to do anyway, so that makes sense. The services that it provides, it can be a Samba or CIFS or Windows file server. This is, in fact, where we keep all those ping images. A great example of how to use your cheap storage. We don't want that image of the faculty member's computer to disappear, but it doesn't necessarily need to take up space on our EMC storage. So we've got Samba services enabled. It can serve as an NFS server. We're not doing that. HTTP and web dev we have enabled for one specific use case involving remote collaboration with some folks. And we have an FTP server that I just flipped that switch so I can do a demo. I don't really need it. iSCSI, no. rsync. This can be an rsync host. I'll just leave that there. There's some people in the room who go, oh, UPS, it can actually talk to a UPS and shut down properly when UPS fails. The LDAP server you saw before, you need that to run your local database of users. And it can be an iSCSI initiator, which I don't need, but I'll talk about in a second. Okay. Network access. This is the kind of thing where having an appliance really pays off, except that some of you will already be reading down there and you'll see this last line. Don't look at that last line. Okay, the great thing about the network access configuration is you can lock it down to just Emory in this case, just the law school for something else, just my house, for my photos. No. I need access from that. This one, all right, wrong, bad. I shouldn't have done that. You should never open up access to something providing file services to the entire world. Again, we had this quickie remote collaboration thing that we needed, and so that's the way I did that. But I like the way that they conceive of this. This is more an enterprise-oriented approach to things, which is that the device is locked down to your local network unless you decide, although they make it fairly easy in the GUI, unless you decide to open it up to other computers and other networks. It's a good approach. The right way to do this, of course, is to give the remote user access to your VPN, right? And then they would VPN in, and they would hit this rule here, let's say, and you would give them access to the shares. If I want to lazy. Okay, volumes. Currently, I've got 74% of this free, and by free we mean just unallocated. It's sitting there waiting to be turned into something, it's raw storage space. Images, as I've said before, we use this to store all of our ping images on, and we have a tiny, and that reminds me of why I have the FTP turned on. We have a tiny little thing that allows the university library system to exchange Apache logs with our local librarians so they can figure out how our proxies are being used within the library. And so they just ask for FTP, and that's how we set it up. You configure volumes here. Here are the image files. Here are the ping images underneath that. Volume 1 is our separate storage. Library, this external collaboration project, and I just called it Dropbox. This is all pretty much point and click. It does take, it is not as polished as a commercial GUI might be, but here's an example of editing the library share. Remember, this is the share so they can trade Apache log files back and forth over FTP. And so we have the share name, share description. We could give it an SMB name. Share access mode is controlled access. This is not a public thing. And again, remember, everything is group-based. So I've given local users, the local users group, I've made that the primary group, and I've given them read-write access to this share. Here's this little matrix of all of the services that are offered and how they work within this context. We've got Samba servers. Samba services are turned on read-write for local users. Remember, you have to be both within our network and you have to authenticate with a username and password before you would have access. We've turned off NFS, as I said before. We've turned off WebDAV for this one. And we have FTP on because the person sending us the log files wants to FTP the log files up to us. rsync is also turned off. All right. That's a quick
So all these services are automatically tied to your LDAP authentication.
They are automatically tied to your LDAP authentication, and had I gone ahead and joined this box to the domain, use their GUI tool to join it to the domain, they would be tied to the University Active Directory.
That's very cool.
It is actually. It's really neat. I was tiptoeing into this when I set this up the first time, and we've talked about downloading 44,000 records out of the University Active Directory. I just like, it's worked out well to run it as a separate thing. Phew. All right. You can all go back and look at this later. But I'll keep going. All right. One of the things we like, remember I talked about not going for the absolute cheapest hardware possible, even on your second and third tier storage. The RAID controllers, we use these 3-ware RAID controllers. I don't own stock in their company, but they work really well. AMCC owns them now, I think, the power company, the UPS company. The great thing about the 3-wares is that they have rock solid Linux support, but they also have a Linux command line utility. And so what you can do then is have the command line utility report out some information on a particular controller, pipe that into mail, and send that along. We make that a cron job, so it runs every night at 4 in the morning, and whoever's alias to root gets this email every morning, and hopefully every morning it says, okay. That's what we live for, is okay. Yeah, they are Western Digitals. And you can see it's a 1.4 terabyte array. If I had taken a little more time, of course, rather than getting the email, I would have written a little wrapper on the server that would only have sent the email out if there was something to be aware of. And again, for those of you who are thinking about primary, first tier, core storage, this wouldn't be sufficient. Once a day is not enough. But for this kind of application, once a day seems to be about the right balance to get a notice. And we have actually had, once we had a heat-related failure where the array degraded. And so we had to replace one of the drives in the box. What are some of the ways you can use Openfiler? As I said, we use it primarily for ping. It's great for backup or second-tier storage. We have another Openfiler box that we use for disk-to-disk backup using another script that I'm not going to talk about today. But you guys, if you're ever looking for a disk-to-disk backup script and you're in the Unix, Linux world, take a look at RSnapshot. RSnapshot's a wrapper around rsync that uses hard links to save significantly on the amount of storage you back up. And we've been using it for our disk-to-disk backup for years now, and saved our tail more than once. But anyway, so it's a good place for our snapshot storage, and we have a whole separate box that does our snapshot and takes snapshots of various machines within our server. Finally, if you're experimenting with ESX or ESXi for virtualization, you need a SAN to do that. And this makes a great SAN for that. It's an iSCSI target. Again, this is not something I need. We're fortunate enough to have, both the Apple box and the university's EMC stuff. But I've stuck up a link there. There are a million tutorials on how to experiment with Openfiler and VMware. Sir?
I was going to do that for a test environment. We got a production ESX environment and test. The one limitation is that if you're running certain cluster software, like the Oracle Rack or some of the other OS clustering, the last time I checked, the Openfiler iSCSI is not SCSI-free persistent reservation capable, so it can't do certain clustering features at OS and application level. But the iSCSI stuff works otherwise quite well.
Okay, I just feel like I've been totally pwned. Whatever Dan said, that was correct. I mean, that makes sense. Again, what you're getting here is basic iSCSI support and good for the test lab environment, but I guess it doesn't surprise me that, once you're moving into Oracle, virtualizing these Oracle rack clusters, that they might want more than that, whatever that was. All right, so let me go back. Other questions about Openfiler? Sir?
This looks very similar to another protocol, FreeNAS, which I played around with a long time ago. And the main problem I ran into with that was got it all set up, RAID 5 array, everything's working fine, had a disk fail, and simply couldn't get the array to rebuild. Have you actually run into any disk failure with this?
We did. We actually did have
How
this.
quickly was what kind of turnaround was there in terms of addressing it? And
It hopped right to it. It said, yes, sir, I will rebuild now. It did rebuild the array. Rebuilding an array is always, to me, a white-knuckle, ulcer-causing experience. I don't know how many of you have sat through that. It takes orders of magnitude longer than you think it's going to take.
8 hours to 10 hours to 12 hours.
You sit there. If I watch it, maybe it'll rebuild
53% complete. Yeah.
Right, exactly. No, so we have actually gone through that, and we did have an array rebuild. When I was first looking at these, and understand that because of the pace of change, there are all of these, appliances now that you can buy at Micro Center or Fry's or Newegg or whatever that now incorporate a whole lot of these technologies. When we started looking at this 3 or 4 years ago, we were looking at FreeNAS versus Openfiler. And I did actually stand up a FreeNAS instance. And it just seemed to be coming from a different place than Openfiler. Openfiler seemed to be somebody who was familiar with EMC and was coming down to this level. And the FreeNAS tool seemed different to me. I don't know. For our purposes, Openfiler has worked.
so it's more like a more sophisticated product that's been kind of stripped and dumbed down versus something that's very basic that keep trying to patch things onto.
That's the way I feel about it. But again, so many of these things are just, if I had an unsuccessful experience with the RAID rebuild, I might be saying something different. But it worked. It did the right thing for us. And the other thing I'd point out is that so much of that stuff is dependent on the hardware. It's dependent on the controllers. And I know that there are now some other controllers with really solid RAID support in Linux. But at the time we were putting these out, these 3-wares were just bulletproof. Some great pieces of hardware. Other comments about Openfiler? Are there other open source NAS solutions that people are exploring?
The Open Solaris, I believe, is the only one that hasn't studied through persistent reservations, but they do also have most of these options, but it's definitely not as well laid out as this. I looked at FreeNAS, Open Solaris, and this, and I think this has the best overall interface and capabilities.
That's good to hear. I haven't looked at Open Solaris. Now, is Solaris the home of the ZFS? Is that where that comes from?
They're the owners of ZFS. And,
yeah. Because this is all built on top of ZFS. There's a whole separate, much more sophisticated use case here that I have not talked about, which has to do with leveraging ZFS to take snapshots. My original concept with leaving all that free space on the drive was that I was going to come back and set up a lot of space for a snapshot. We just haven't needed it, and I thought we might need the storage for something else. But ZFS, I believe that ZFS is sort of the foundation of that snapshot technology, and so that makes sense. I'm going to talk about 2 other things. I think I've got until 11:30, so I'm going to kind of move through these fairly quickly. These are a little different. We're moving to a slightly different, like I said, it's a potpourri. A little bit different set of tools. ThinStation, the concept behind ThinStation is that you create a CD or a USB key that you can boot a machine from and actually be able to do some productive work with the machine. My original concept of how we would use this is we have to replace a faculty member's machine. They just want something to do during the 2 or 3 hours while the machine is being repaired. And so if we could get them out to the web, there are lots of other ways to address that use case, by the way. I mean, you can keep a spare stock of machines. There are lots of things you can do. This is just one way at it. But so the concept was it would be nice if they could get to our Windows servers. It would be really nice if they had access to Firefox and if they could look at PDFs and Flash. ThinStation is a very small optimized Linux distro that's been around for a long time. Ages and ages and ages ago when I was at another job, I wrote something that they use. The use case is the one I've just described. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like once it boots. To a casual viewer, This might appear to be Windows. Okay, all right. That's me. I know it doesn't really look like Windows, but it does have our branding from our marketing department. So we're in compliance. The thing that I put on this guy is a file manager, Firefox, and a couple of links to two terminal servers that we've got in the building. The thing to understand about this requires no hard drive at all in the machine. There is no hard drive in the machine. The user puts the CD in the machine boots up, and this is what they get. There's no login, there's no nothing. When they turn the machine back off, everything goes away. And this was fairly revolutionary, I think 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It's become much more common, but it's still, I don't know, it tickles me. Every time this works. I think this is kind of neat. And so we have a ton of these old P4s, these big old boat anchor Dells, sitting around that I can't bear to surplus, although I've been told I need to. And so this is one way to use those machines. You can use them as terminals. Again, the trade-off is always flexibility and sweat equity. The ThinStation folks have worked very hard to lower some of the barriers by creating something they call Broken Link, the TS-O-Matic, which will help you create your own ThinStation image without knowing anything about Linux. And their use case is similar to mine. They assume you want maybe a Citrix client, or you want VNC, or you want a Windows Terminal Services client, or you want a web browser. And you want to burn that to a CD and hand it out. And it's sort of, no matter how borked your computer is, if you can get it to power up and the CD spins, you can get back on the web and start looking at XKCD again. The way that the TS-O-Matic works, you make your way through this set of screens, answering questions. It builds a configuration file and then generates an ISO for you, a custom ISO with the stuff you want. It has huge numbers of NICs that it supports most of the weird hardware out there in the world. I went a little bit further than this, and I don't want to just bore you with all the details. They're in my little wiki page, but we customized it, and I wrote some scripts that manage some of the stuff that's involved in the customization. But if that's appealing to you, it's a really interesting tool. It's something that I like a lot. It will also recognize USB keys USB drives that you put in there. All right. So build notes, yada yada yada, boring. Firefox, boring. Get down to the bottom here. Okay. I'm going to move on because I think that's not as interesting as system rescue CD. All right. Most technicians or most former technicians still carry around, I actually do, carry around a CD of stuff in case you find someone in distress, with a busted computer and you want to try to fix it. The system rescue CD is a Linux take on that. It's a bootable CD that allows you to do a bunch of standard things you might want to do to help somebody out of a jam. Now this clashes very much with what we're trying to do within my shop, which is we don't fix things anymore, we re-image. Okay. I can't. Del's over there chuckling because he knows that while this is a stated goal, you get into these arguments with people, and they won't give you their machine if they know you're going to nuke it. I don't know why that is. Anyway, let's say you're trying to be nice. There are vacation pictures that I managed to save London vacation pictures I managed to save at the root of the C drive. Yes. Okay. So you're going to try to help them out. System Rescue CD is one of those tools. There are lots of other ones. Some of you may be familiar with BART PE on the Windows side of the house. BART PE is wonderful stuff. Allows you to do a lot of the same thing. One of the things I'll walk you through here is you can boot from the CD. I've got 3 separate use cases. Let me step back. 3 separate use cases for this. Boot from the System Rescue CD and copy data to the network. So their boot sector's been borked. They can't boot into Windows. The Windows folder is gone, something like that. And I actually saw someone here at CALI do this a few years ago. I'm not that brave. I don't want to pull up a virtual machine, nuke the boot sector, and show you how this works. Take my word for it. But you can boot into this thing and then copy the data off to the network. It comes up, and in the Linux world, this is a very, very helpful screen, right? I know it's got about 200 words too many, but it is actually a very helpful screen. It tells you how to get on the network. It tells you how to mount that broken NTFS partition, so you can take a look at it and make sure you've got the right data. And it also tells you how to get into a GUI, a graphical user interface. I always forget how to mount NT partitions under Linux, or sometimes I forget how to mount NT partitions under Linux. Here's an example. fdisk-l shows you what partitions are out there. You can see there's an NTFS partition available to us. We can mount it because of that helpful screen that reminded us how to mount it. Once you mount it, you see all the usual Windows stuff. And then once I've got it mounted, I can copy that data wherever I need to copy it. There are lots of other ways to do that. And if you're more coming out of the Windows world, you may want to look at something like this, where you mount the Windows server as another folder, and then you just copy all the data from one folder on this machine to the folder up on the network server. Yes, you could do this with another tool. The other way that I use this, and we ran into an interesting issue with Ping, where Ping wasn't cooperating with us and resizing partitions, and we needed a way to resize partitions without starting over again. gparted is bundled with System Rescue CD. When System Rescue CD boots into its GUI mode, which is option 5 up here, when it boots into its GUI mode, you get a basic terminal window up here, a nice, fairly nice GUI here with a quote-unquote start menu, and then the gparted partition tool. What was the old partition magic, I think, in the Windows world some time back? It looks a little bit like partition magic. You can drag and drop partitions. You can move the data over. Again, this is one of those exercises that if you're talking about a 300 gig drive, you need to move the data from one partition to another. It can take significant time. I've got a video again, which I'm not going to make you suffer through, but in case you're interested in it, it really is very straightforward. Drag and drop. Just remember, you're dragging and dropping things that affect the partition table on the hard drive of the faculty member's computer. So, you double check everything. Maybe you've already made a backup with Paint. It works. In this case, as an experiment, what I was doing was changing a 2 gig NTFS partition and a brand new 1 gig thing that I had attached. I took the 2 gig and split it into NTFS and FAT32, and I formatted the new 1 gig one as a Linux partition. Windows properly sees everything, doesn't know what to do about the Linux partition, so it just shows it as file system blank, healthy unknown partition type. It properly split these. This was shot after I rebooted back into Windows. Windows was happy with this. We've done this a number of times. It works. So it's something else to file away. Now, if you've really done if you've really written over your partition table, or you've done something horrible, or a virus has done something horrible to the PC, the tool you want and I really do put this in the category of black magic, and we really should re-image at this point because I'm going to waste a day and a half on this, is a test disk. Test disk does lots more than test disks. It searches through partition tables looking for fragments of partition tables, looking for partitions. It'll help you recover the data. It's an amazing tool. If you don't like Linux, Test Disk runs on OS X, and it also runs on Windows as well. So you can take that with you, even if none of the rest of this looks appealing. It's nice to run, well, I would say it's a requirement to run tools like this from something other than the disk you're trying to diagnose. Of course, everybody understands that. So that's why it makes sense to me that running Test Disk off a CD is a good thing. And so it's a really useful tool in the right hands. Okay. Sir?
Did you say the test disk is on the System Rescue CD?
It is on the System Rescue CD. And the other thing about Test Disk, by the way, unlike some of these other products I've mentioned, they have fantastic documentation. Whoever did this, they just did a fantastic job. So Test Disk is great. I'm trying to think of the commercial tool that we've used for data recovery that we installed onto Part PE. It's reminiscent of that. I'm drawing a blank. Get Data Back. If you've used Get Data Back or Get Data Back NTFS, it's similar to that. By the way, if you're looking for a commercial tool, Get Data Back is a great one. So that's all for that. And again, Test Disk, really all no warranties, please. That's a really, like I said, black magic, but neat stuff. And those are the four big tools that I wanted to share. They're in different spaces and they do different things, but they have been helpful to us. The last thing I want to mention is MythTV stuff. MythTV's been covered over and over again at CALI and at EDUCAUSE and other things. At Emory Law, we have nothing as extensive or quite as cool as what Tom, Tim, and other folks have put together here at Rutgers. But we do have 5 cameras that get regularly scheduled recordings. We're adding another 5 this summer, actually. While we're up here, they're working back in Atlanta, putting more stuff in. And I just wanted to put in a little plug for my page on MythTV here. The only thing that's interesting about it, the only thing that distinguishes it from other MythTV implementations is that we have a Kramer switcher that takes 8 inputs and has 4 outputs. It's a matrix switcher, right? And so we have 4 video cards. Here, by the way, if you've never seen what MythTV looks like, this is fed from our room reservation system. And the lovely thing about this is I didn't have to write the GUI, right? I mean, this is just MythTV. That's what it looks like. It's a TiVo. Think of TiVo if you haven't done anything with Myth. It's fed by our room reservations data. Here's an example of an individual class, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to show you. We took an old IBM and put in 2 video cards with 2 daughter cards. 2 capture cards with 2 daughter cards. So we've got 4 streams that we can record at one time. And that's what it looks like and what used to be called our hardware. This thing here is a Kramer switcher. It takes 8 inputs. It gives you 4 simultaneous outputs. You can move any input to any output, which is what makes it a matrix switcher. But the thing that really makes it cool is this. It's got RS-232 on the back and a pretty basic little programming language. And so what I did was I wrote something in Python to send the right things out the port at the right time from Myth to this guy to capture the right inputs. And it's just, Myth thinks it's a channel changer script from a remote, and I'm just changing the channel. but I'm feeding that channel, changing information to the Kramer. And so that's actually been pretty cool. It's worked out well for us, and I've got a bunch of information in here about what we spent, how the projects come together, and things like that. So if you have questions about that, I'd be glad to talk to you about that. And that's it, and I think we have 5 minutes left. So are there any questions or comments, or is there a great open source tool sort of in this space that I'm totally ignorant of? I'm sure there is. Sir?
Kind of unrelated, did you use open source wiki for the blog slide?
I did. Yeah, this is, okay. This is Moin Moin, which is written in Python.
Yeah.
There's a theme here. Moin Moin is a good blog that we run. This is actually running on an ESXi box, and the storage for it is sitting on the university's EMC server. So again, a cooperative thing. We do use this sort of thing for documentation, and we're actually starting to use WordPress a lot more. I'm so impressed with WordPress lately, as far as what it can do to help us to lower the barriers for sharing content. And
yeah, a blog tool as well.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a great blog tool as well, but it's also, especially with 3.0, because you've got multiple kinds of content you can have now, it's really moving into the CMS space. And WordPress 3.0 now includes WordPress multi-user and regular WordPress. Very cool. But anyway, this is Moin Moin, which you can do all sorts of neat stuff with, and I like it. Other comments or questions? Thank you very much for your patience. No, what we're doing is, and I'm talking we have mine suspended over there. John,
Oh, good. How you doing, Dan?
It actually looks like
So you're running down,
I had that.
so Switcher takes it.
Oh, yeah. So terrible.
you know, we really got those cameras because Terry from South Texas is he's such a
Yeah.
Oh, you grabbed the data off of me for ridiculous. I've actually just grabbed the data off. Well, I wrote some. So,
Yes, we do have
but I can, if you But we're, okay, so your choice is to either, just deal with the composite now, right, which is what we're really doing. Our fallback is over TCP/IP, right, the web video. But as far as the capture, then we don't have that. Except that the thing that I wrote is so horrible, so bad, is basically grabbing each JPEG frame and concatenating them. I'm so foul.
Then are you, you're not controlling them at all?
We are controlling.
Through the web interface?
The control stuff through the web interface is great.
Yeah.
No, that part is
But then you gotta log into each camera, you can't just switch with the joystick.
No.
So, by controlling the
Hand control.
Yeah, the pan tilt zoom. No, the pan tilt zoom. The matrix switching stuff we're trying to leave just in the hands of.
Not much, you wanna put anything officially together?
Obviously, someone could walk around to the back. Or you can push the button. But
I don't mind just putting the image of people.
We really try to control it. You enter it into the schedule, and it gets recorded that way.
You want to go somewhere and talk about it for next hour? I think I feel a home group project early in our school. I'm going to apply.
Are you thinking about Cam?
Yeah.
He's done some just great stuff.
I wish I would have went this way with the webcams instead of trying to do deposit coax.
There's a lot to be said for that war. And have you talked to Phil Worley and David Dickens?
I did.
That Volantic stuff? If you've got,
It's expensive.
Oh, is it?
No.
Are you thinking of Volantic stuff, or you're just thinking of coax back?
We don't have the coax plan in our, so we would probably do whatever's easiest. But I like the handheld Zoom feature. I'd like to be able to control that. These don't do handheld Zoom, do they?
They do not.
They're fixed.
So we would probably go with
That's
this.
the one thing.
I'd be willing to bite the bullet and deal with coax and capture in order to get the handheld Zoom.
Well, and the other thing, because the Sonys, and I'm not sure if Sonys are the right way to go, I just, again, I really lean on Terry. And we're putting 5 more out, they were totally wild. I like that.
I just don't like the data camera.
Well, there is, because those cameras come out of the security space, you can actually buy virtual security software that will do that.
You can't, but it still captures it in a DVX format, a specialized DVR, or
They have to do
a
something.
special format that,
But that would get you started. I mean, that would definitely get you started.
I just want to tie in.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Chad, I was just
Don't worry about it. I know inside now.
Hey!
Here,
Because that would make sense. That's not the cultural world cup game.
I just sort of check periodically. I always forget, at heart, you really are a Brazilian. I mean, after that visit, I seen it for you were retired in Brazil. I noticed the shirt, with the Guaraná. Yeah. That was good, I enjoyed it. Well, thanks. Hopefully a few nuggets for everyone. There were just little things that it kind of stacked up.
Yeah. I haven't seen that big client software. I've used
Actually, I didn't dwell on that because I think it really appeals to a very small niche of people. But I actually love that because it doesn't require. I mean, we've got LTSP, and especially like I mentioned the other day, LTSP with a modern client, with an Atom processor in the client, is lovely. I mean, we got rid of these 2-minute boot times over TFTP, and it's like, it's really nice. And so probably LTSP is the way to go, but I kind of like this idea of here's a CD, at least you can get it in the web.
and if it's got a terminal server.
Right. And that's just our desktop. All of this is, just wrappers around the stuff we're already familiar with. But the other thing I was trying to do today was encourage some primarily to experiment a bit. Yeah. So, anyway, thanks.
Hey, how you doing? Still. That sounds like Brazil had a good first half. Just got
yeah, the database piece. They use one. The database you do the practice exam and then install the software.
So you're talking about software secure? We're happy customers.
Well, it's going to generate. It's going to generate to me. It's starting to take time before